Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining another Authority Labs webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about SEO in 2020. And really, what that means is what's to prepare for next year? Are there evergreen strategies that we can look for so that every time we launch a new year, we don't have to trash everything we did the year before and come up with something new? So today's guests are incredibly talented, and I'm so excited to talk with them and hear all about what they have to share on the subject. We have Duane, who's VP of Industry Insights at Yext, and Cindy, who is the CEO and founder of Mobile Mixie and is the mobile woman. So Duane, Mobile Moxie, pardon, but you are the mobile woman of all. Duane, before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry?
Yeah, so my name is Duane Forrester. I've been, maybe coming on 24 years now in the industry. Been here a while. I, started like everybody else, just doing SEO and that kind of stuff. I at one point ran MSN's SEO program, moved over to running Bing Webmaster Tools, wrote a couple of books. Ran Bruce Clay Incorporated on the operations side for a little while, and now I'm over at Yext, obviously. So broad history, deep history, and very fortunate to know everyone who's involved today for a long time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Duane. And welcome, Michelle, who is the VP of Product and Innovation at AimClear. Thank you so much for joining us, Michelle. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in the industry and what you do with AimClear.
Oh, gosh. Well, I got started in the industry a long time ago, in the mid-90s, working at one of the first online agencies in Orange County, actually, with Danny. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I've been in the industry now since the mid-90s. So at AimClear, what I'm doing, however, VP of Product and Innovation, working with DevOps, AdOps, and Marketing Ops, essentially managing all of our data products.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Cindy, can you share how you got started and tell us a little bit more about Mobile Moxie?
Yeah, sure. So I started by building crappy websites in Front Page many years ago, and they weren't ranking, so we had to figure out why. And so I started learning about this thing called SEO from a lady named Jill Whalen. I was on her newsletter, and then got focused on mobile SEO because it seemed important and no one was talking about it, so I figured someone should. And that's when I started my company a little over 10 years ago, actually coming up on 11 years ago. And yeah, we do mobile SEO tools, apps, everything.
Awesome. So thank you guys again so much for joining. Let's dive straight into the first questions. For those who are joining the webinar, we are going to have Q&A at the end. So feel free to jot down your questions inside the question box, and we'll definitely make sure and address them at the end. But first, let's talk about how SEO has evolved over the years in general. Duane, I would love to hear what has been your favorite and least favorite change in SEO over the past few years.
Yeah, no, I don't know why people are talking about change. I think SEO is, just the exact same way it was over 20 years ago. Nothing has changed. It's all right there. And of course, I'm wrapping that with sarcasm tags because, the reality today is, I think one of the most favorite parts of this that I appreciate is I get to walk around and tell people, like, there is no 101, there is no 201, it's all advanced now. And if you're not hitting on everything, you're falling behind. And we're finally at that stage where all of these different components that people have singled out over, let's say, the last 10 years, right? Like, oh, content is king. If you do content, you're going to win. Oh, technical SEO. Oh, secure. Oh, mobile friendly. Like, if you just do that deep dive, you will succeed. I've never truly subscribed to that in my life or in my career. And so now I'm finally, like, I don't know, maybe feeling slightly vindicated that we're at this stage where it's like, those of us who've been running around telling you need a balanced approach, you need to do well across all these things. Well, the search engines are kind of proving that right now. And here we are. But by far, the most impressive thing to me is people in this industry, we have grown an industry where the major providers of the solution, so we'll call that the search engine, for example, they actively listen to us. And I was there, Cindy was there, Michelle was there when that was not the case. When we would beat our heads against the wall, all of us showing screenshots of a failure or a problem, just to be completely dismissed. And I'm not saying that kind of stuff doesn't happen today, it still does. But there are many more active conversations going on. And so if you're truly having a problem today, it is solvable. And it's the solutions are there, the support is there. So to me, like that's kind of the biggest thing, right? Is I just don't see very many dark corners anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's some
Michelle,
dark corners related to GMB.
This is what I was thinking about.
Put that out there.
The
Sorry to
new,
interrupt.
the new black box, yeah.
I didn't want to like hit that too hard on the head, but like
It's been a rough week for the local SEOs.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Michelle, being in the industry and touching in SEO for so long, do you kind of have the same perspective as Duane, or do you kind of have different favorites and least favorites of the changes of SEO over the years?
So, my least favorite thing about SEO, and this remains the case, and it has been forever, is some of the refusal to accept that it's just another marketing channel, right? And if we treat it like it's something special and unique and glorious and different, then keep fighting for those budgets, right? But if you accept that this is just another channel, it's a very important channel, it's a very big channel, but it's just another channel, and it has its place within the overall channel mix, and it shouldn't be the only channel. And you should understand the fundamentals of marketing across channels, because that's going to make everything easier. I think it's going to make everything easier working with other departments, getting budgets, getting a seat at the table, being taken seriously, all of those kinds of things. And I've been saying this, and Duane and Cindy, because they've been doing it for so long, they know I've been saying this for all this time, that just kind of accept that it's part of a marketing channel and learn marketing fundamentals. I still think there are a lot of SEOs out there that focus on niche aspects of the work and don't bother to become educated on marketing fundamentals. And I do think that that's going to be the differentiator between the successful SEOs and the unsuccessful SEOs in the long run, because marketing fundamentals don't change, the channel will.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. Cindy, would you say that mobile is part of the marketing fundamentals these days, especially from an SEO perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Google is saying themselves that more than 60%, or at least 60% of searches worldwide are mobile. So I'll say what I've been saying for a couple of years now. If you're doing SEO and only focusing on desktop, you're not doing good SEO. You're not doing a good job. You're missing more than half the market. So yeah, mobile is a big deal.
Michelle, what's something that you're looking forward to in terms of SEO in 2020? Is there any new things coming, or is there new strategies that you're like, in 2020, this is going to be great for SEO?
I'm super excited about what the engines are doing with artificial intelligence, actually, with natural language understanding, because I think that's going to force everyone to really level up their content game. And I'll disagree with Duane a little bit about content. Content remains king. And I think you only need to double down even more on it. Serious. I mean, content is everything. Everything you do as a brand is content. And the engine's ability to understand content more naturally actually empowers us to write better content. We just have to invest in it. And that's something that I think is going to be, I think that's going to be a big shift for a lot of marketers and for a lot of agencies and for their clients, because I think that content tends to get treated budget-wise as an afterthought. I think we all agree it's super important. Content is king. We say it every day. But when it comes to budgets, clients will spend $1 million on design and spend not even 1/10 of that on content, and that's very backwards. So I'm excited that the changes that the engines are undergoing will force people to take a harder look at their content.
Do you have a suggestion aside from the search engines encouraging it, but do you have a suggestion to kind of tell clients or maybe tell your manager or VP that we need to invest in content? Like how can an individual really showcase the importance of that, especially going into a new year?
I think you can showcase it by demonstrating samples of good content. And what I would do is I would honestly ask them, who would you hire to write a commercial? And how much would you pay for that commercial? And there's not a person on the planet that's going to say 5 cents a word or whatever crazy pricing scheme people come up with, right? They're going to want a professional writer. They're going to want a professional copywriter. They're going to want an editor on it. So I think you don't treat it as if it's different because the content isn't different.
And Duane, I gotta ask, so what's your opinion on content?
So I feel like I have to defend myself here. So
Here's your chance.
I'm going to give you the context on my previous content comment. The point behind it was that people are chasing bright and shiny objects in the moment. That's all. I am a firm believer in content because I believe in understanding intent and then providing answers on that path. So this comes to the very core of good quality content, as Michelle was pointing out, like great example. Who do you want to write your TV commercial? And how do you think you're going to like compensate them for it? Because they know exactly what they're worth. They know how their words impact people. And I've worked with a lot of content writers. Some were fabulous, others not quite so much. And, you know, the truth of the matter is those words matter. It's the words that create the emotion. It's the emotion that creates the engagement. It's the engagement that drives the conversion. So if you suck at the word, everything else is gone. You don't stand a chance at it. And so the reality is, and I believe, you know, this latest round of updates that we've seen with BERT, the natural language access for all of the engines and for everything they're digging in on, this is, and I don't know if the industry fully understands this yet, we are about to see a sea change in the landscape. We are at that edge, okay? Surfers floating out there, that wave is about to hit us. And you're either paying attention and ready to go, or it's just going to feel like a gentle swell. You'll be forgiven for missing it, but then you're not going to get the memo to get out of the water. And you're going to be the only one floating around out there all alone. Because without that content, without painting that picture, it's just a lost cause. There's always another answer in a search engine result. The engine is always willing to flip to another one to test it out, try it out. So I'm a big fan of the concept of brand verified answers, where if the brand is an expert on their product or service, they're the one who should be able to answer this the best. And if their answer isn't the one coming up for a product or service related to them, well, then some third party is going to take that. And the engine is going to be okay with that, because as long as the searcher is satisfied, the engine is satisfied. It's up to the business to move that forward. And it's got to happen through content. I mean, let's face it, technical SEO, you can do that. We know what those pieces are. Getting your technology stack set up, you may shop poorly, but you can shop wisely and check those boxes off in today's world. But the content, that is still a tough nut to crack, and I see businesses fail at this all the time. You know,
Can I chime in on this? Okay, so I actually hate the phrase "content is king." I have strong opinions on this because I think it's created a lot of extra work for people that was low quality. Like low quality content is not king. Low quality content is just low quality content. And so if we start treating content like a king instead of just saying content is king, so we need more content. Like we don't need necessarily more content, we need better content.
Yep.
And it needs to be applicable and useful for what you sell. So for instance, I was on my local grocery store website and they have a recipe section, and I get it, but like I don't go there for recipes, I go there for groceries. So if they were to compare different kinds of apples and be like, the Fuji apples are, you know, the ones that you bought last time and you liked, or something like that, some kind of comparison of the different apples or the different products that they actually sell, instead of just random like tack on stuff that doesn't, it makes kind of sense but not great sense. That's where we need to be smart about the content. and do a better job. And I think that goes with the natural language, and that goes with being an expert in what you do, but not just being an expert at stuff related to what you do.
I'm going to completely agree with Cindy on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that goes to focus. Yeah, and I think that goes to focus. And I think that when you see things like that, what I see is an unfocused marketing department or an out of control SEO maybe. Because again, it's trying to be all things to all people to capture clearly what they're trying to actually capture is a word or a phrase, not an intent, not authority around a topic, because a grocery store is never going to be an authority on, let's say, an apple pie recipe, right? But I also think that goes to, I think we're slow to adapt to the changes. I think that technology moves fast. I think the search engines move fast, and we are slow to adapt to that. And I think the challenge is, and the problem is, in hopping on every new shiny thing, right? You mentioned shiny things. How many people went to their clients and said, you know, okay, budget for Google Plus, give it to me. You know, Google Plus was never a thing, right? But a lot of people really doubled down on it because a lot of people will kind of do anything Google says do, right? Without sitting back and thinking, how does this apply to our core business? How does this apply to our customers? Would we be better off spending money in other places and doing other things? But we push around a lot of data in our industry that's not very good, that's not very valid, saying, you know, oh, if you, for example, the famous correlation, not causation study that social signals matter, therefore must Google Plus, right? Things like that. They actually, ultimately in the long run, can harm us and harm our clients because we're not focusing them. We're chasing the shiny objects, like you mentioned, Duane.
Yeah, I had a meeting this morning where the client was saying, oh, we've got 1 million pages of content. And I'm like, awesome, walk me through it. And all it is the same page over and over with different city names on it around America. And I still don't know how they got to 1 million, because I'm like, we don't have 1 million little cities and burgs in America. And then they said, well, but we do this by every service we offer at every location. And I'm like, oh boy, so how do you maintain your 1 million pages? You know, and their maintenance program is to send a request to their agency of record, which can take over 2 weeks to turn around. And so clearly they respond rapidly to what the search engines are doing, what consumers want. Like, I'm just like, this isn't going to cut it. And while I won't say the brand name, if I did, every single person would know this brand name. They've encountered this brand in their lives. And I'm just like, I get it, you're big, but damn, are you moving slow? You know, and that's unfortunately where we stand. And somebody thinks that quantity of content is quality. And it's like, no. And that does not answer a question when you literally just copy and paste the same stuff over and over 50,000 times. It's not a good strategy.
So at what point does, yeah, it really isn't strategy. And at what point does content become quality and it's no longer focusing on quantity? Because I think that is a pretty hard drawn line in the sand, but it's also confusing for some marketers to really understand, okay, I know I have to push out a lot of content and be consistent with it, but at what point do I start sacrificing that for the quality? And I think that's a pretty regular struggle for a lot of marketers and content creators out there, as well as content managers. Does anyone have any opinions on how you can really understand when it's time to, or what signals to really know, okay, this is enough quantity wise, now I can focus on quality? Is there a point?
I think you always focus on quality. And I think that there's no number that's right. You know, how many blog posts should I write a month? How many this, how many that? I think those are invalid questions. I think the question is, do we have something to say? Does it address a market need? Does it address a customer need? Are we an authority, or can we hire someone who's an authority to create the content around it? And then when you get to creating that content, I remember having a writer come to me one time and say, okay, how many words do you want for this article? And I just said, as many as it takes, you know, no more, no less. right to the topic, be comprehensive. I'll edit out the fluff if I think it needs to get edited out, but I'm relying on you to know when the content is comprehensive enough without being unnecessary, right? And I think that's the problem. I think people look for, they look for too much structure around something that is by nature not necessarily structured, unless you're writing something like a recipe, right? A recipe has specific things it needs. You need the ingredients, you need the instructions, right? Other topics are a little bit more nebulous, and they should be. And when we talk about the changes the engines are making, they're becoming more nebulous. They require less structure in what we serve them. So we should take that hint and be happy, right, and embrace it and think, yay, now that actually frees us up, right? We don't have to meet these requirements. It frees us up to write just as much as we need, no more, no less.
Well, and I think for a while, Google was rewarding algorithmically people who were pumping out a bunch of content. At least they were getting more frequent quals and stuff like that. But my hope is that Google will continue to fine tune that piece of the algorithm to understand better, like this is a news related site and they do need to be publishing daily or, more hourly, whatever. But this grocery site still deserves to be crawled, even if it's not pushing out a new recipe every day, or even if it's not pushing out new content every single day. And hopefully they'll weight that and kind of reward it appropriately instead of overemphasizing just quantity as a feedback for increased crawl rate.
So I think we're doing that. I think with what you're seeing with Bing, with where they're doing the immediate, you let us know when there's something new. I think that addresses this problem you're talking about. And I expect we'll see something very similar from Google shortly.
So my feeling is, and Michelle, you sat in the same session that I sat in a recent conference here in LA, where we listened to Bing talk about how they're managing spam and the advances they've made in that. So when we talk about spam, the flip side to the spam coin is quality content, because you're on a curve of quality where eventually you fall off and you are spam. And if these guys are capable of managing spam at the levels they are, and they are capable of continuing that growth, then ultimately their quality markers must also be improving. And so when you apply that natural language processing and the machine learning to that side of the equation, we start to get to a world where I'm going to throw my hands in the air when I say this, but we can just trust Google. And we will be able to use Google as a filter, because the content that does rank will be the marker of what quality actually is, because the systems are fair enough advanced that they can actually be trusted in that way. I don't think we're fully there yet. I mean, we see these algorithmic changes they make right now, and suddenly, call per lead stuff pops to the top again, and the good quality content is being suppressed. They still need to do work on these things. But never think for an instant that work isn't ongoing just because we're not seeing it happening. It is always progressing in the background. And we do end up with this. I mean, I think, Michelle, you kind of alluded to this, and Cindy, you touched on it. Like, it's our industry has a long and storied history of dumbing crap down. Like, literally, maybe it's because a lot of people in the industry are binary, and they're very focused on what's next, the next list, the next check mark, whatever it is. It's part of what draws us into SEO, because it is a relatively structured concept, even though it's still a bit of a black art, because we don't know what's inside those boxes at the engine. So by and large, we remain guessing. But we still end up dumbing it down so that we can walk into a boardroom meeting with the CEO and feed them a one-line answer to explain exactly what Bert is doing. That's not even remotely. Yeah, Siri likes to come up at the worst times on my watch. Like, she does this every presentation when I'm on stage, right? I'm like, I've got nothing to add. Trust me, I don't want to be lost right now. No instructions. But I see this all the time where I'm sitting in a room, the SEO makes a statement in front of senior leaders, and that statement, while not patently wrong, is without context, at best misleading, at worst dangerous, as that senior leadership now feels they have all the information they need to go make the determination, and off they go. you know, and I can't remember who it was that brought it up, but it's like, you know, how much are you spending on X versus your quality of content and your production of content? And I have always been I've always felt that if you produce quality content, eventually you will have a quantity of content. I'm not interested in, can I do 5 articles a day and off I go? And I think that entire concept has been perverted because now we're at the stage where we've got someone who's a quote professional writer who is literally saying, you know, I need $50 a day to make this worth my while. And so I'm going to pop 5 articles out a day at 10 articles each. And therefore I have a job. And someone on the other side of that who's paying the $10 an article is saying, hey, this is good enough to publish. And then they're publishing it. And it's like, it's created a completely false narrative across our industry about what should be focused on. You think about it very simply. You're a consumer. You have a new product, I don't know, a new laptop, and you need to get it up and running. What questions are you going to have? And then what are the answers that are going to get you as in a frictionless possible way to your laptop being up and running? If you have short content, if you have misleading information, stuff that's out of date, if you have, you know, my favorite, here's a list of 3 things, but it turns out it should have been a list of 7 things. Like, that's where we're at today. And so the customer has their brand new laptop, they're frustrated as heck, it's not moving forward for them, and they're blaming, I don't know, who is it, Lenovo in my case, because you don't have the answers to my questions. And that is still a huge failure today. And I honestly believe that if people focused more, it feels like this entire webinar has become about content, but take that, you know, for the value that it is. I mean, I assume you've got your technical SEO covered. I assume you're mobile friendly. I assume you're secure and all of that stuff. But I know for a fact, most businesses are still failing on the content front.
Well, and to loop content back to like the 2020 predictive stuff and what we were talking about with algorithms and how they're adapting, I think that my hope is that we're going to see progress in 2020 with Google's indexing API. Of course, Bing has the indexing API as well. Right now, it's on Google just officially for live streams and jobs. There are people testing the borders on that. But I do anticipate that it's going to be expanded just like AMP was. AMP started with articles and then recipes and then everything. And I think we're going to see the same thing happen with the indexing API. And then Google's not going to have to guess when, you know, when and what portion of the crawling should be determined by how much content you're creating, and they won't have to crawl and look randomly for new stuff. You'll just send it to them in an API when you have something new, and so it'll be much more efficient for everyone. Hopefully.
Hey, you know,
Cindy, crossing fingers.
It's absolutely coming, right? Like something that we don't talk about as SEOs, but I think is really important. Keep in mind that SEO or Google is a publicly traded company that is responsible to shareholders to drive revenue and profitability. One way you do that is cutting down on expenses. One way you do that is you don't send Googlebot everywhere for everything. So like it's inevitable, as much as AMP may have been a play to speed page loads on behalf of a business to Google's ultimate benefit, I believe the indexation side of things and the lack of crawl is exactly the same thing, but driven from a revenue resource side of it.
If they host it, they don't have to randomly crawl it. And
absolutely. And you know, like I know that when the crawl rates were opened up at Bing, like that has an immediate impact on cost of crawling. And then it also has that knock-on impact of every conference I go to, people are talking about crawl budget and how to manage it and how to do this and how to do that. And it's like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could just take one conversation out of your basket and you didn't have to think about it anymore? Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, and yeah, because I can tell you right now, we end up with all the technical stuff solved. We end up with all the spam stuff solved. And yet we still need to fix, we still need to work on, we'll always need to work on the quality side of things. So content, engagement, the user experience, all of these pieces, we'll still always need that focus.
but also something that is different these days from the past couple of years when it comes to content. And every single one of you have constantly echoed this when you talk about content, is the whole idea of user intent. And that is really what will make your content quality versus just pumping out quantity. Michelle, these days we have more data than ever before. And like, that's fun to hear. We're hearing it everywhere, like data, data, data. But for brands and businesses, how can they really wrap their minds around data going into 2020? What can we really use data for, whether it's for better understanding user intent for content or using data to create better SEO strategies? Do you have any tips on how we can better understand the amount of data that we have these days?
So I think we're going to see a shift to people focusing less on big data and looking at the value to really analyzing smaller data, right? So big data is incredibly useful for a lot of applications, a lot of things, doing a lot of machine learning, obviously. Complicated algorithms need more data to be effective and reliable. But for what your average marketer is doing, we capture way more data than we will ever use or ever need or ever be able to meaningfully understand. So I think that the best use of data for people is utilize it to understand your customers. Don't just utilize it to look at, we got this much traffic this month. How actionable is this much traffic, right? We got 100,000 visitors through the door. Okay, what do we do with that? How is that actionable, right? Drill into, well, what did those people do? Segment out those users into groups that you can identify by behavior. I think that looking at the behavior of your customers is going to be, and will always be actually, the best use of any data you can analyze and aggregate, because understanding what they actually do versus what you think they do is where the rubber meets the road. We all set up these funnels and goals. We have these goals in our analytics and these funnels. How often do people compare the funnels they've set up to the actual journeys people take on those sites? And it's really funny because this was exactly the topic of a webinar that I was doing this morning that had technical difficulties, so we're redoing it in December sometime, but it is literally this topic. It is looking at your data and understanding it from a user behavior perspective, not just from an outcome perspective.
So going into kind of like diving into that even deeper, Cindy, do you see mobile data the same way? So when you're transcribing the mobile data specifically to your clients, are you seeing it in a similar pattern, or how do you digest the mobile data?
Yeah, I totally agree with Michelle. I think that big data is in some ways interesting, but potentially overwhelming for the way that businesses can really use it effectively, most businesses anyway. And so looking at data a little bit differently and focusing more on KPIs of the users and pre and post click KPIs. So for instance, something that came up with a client with me yesterday is this idea that mobile results are harder to track and predict and to know, even if you're ranking in position 1, where is that on the page and how much traffic should you expect? And, does that change from place to place? And I think that as an industry, we need better KPIs that are different from rankings and even different from larger visibility, more like digital brand awareness kind of things, kind of KPIs, to hit that and have exposure. Because, like in a ranking, for instance, if you're ranking position 1, that's great, but it's even better if you have mention in the knowledge graph. It's even better if you have your Twitter feed in there somewhere, or if you have an event or map or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And if we just keep measuring ourselves by, Search Console or SEMrush says we're in position 1, we're gonna let our clients down. And so knowing that side of it, and then once they're in the site, tracking them and grouping them appropriately for what can we expect and what, are they a short-term visitor? Are they a long-term, someone that we need to measure lifetime value, those kinds of things, and then target them more effectively from there.
Now, moving into the local search, because that's been such a hot topic lately, Duane, how do you see local search changing in 2020?
So I've always viewed local search as kind of a two-sided item. On one hand, it's very similar to regular search in that there are a lot of factors that play in the local rankings as much as they do in regular rankings. Then you have to add things in like proximity, and you have to add things in like authority. Trying to think of the other word, prominence, things like this. And when you get into these kind of squishy things, like how do you explain to a client what prominence is? It's like how much of a community loves and raves about your pizza versus any other pizza. And then there's an overlay of distance from you to said love oven and all of this stuff. It's a really squishy thing, right? And I think, Cindy's point, like, and we've been talking about this for years, although I don't know that people have been really listening, like KPIs. We need better KPIs than what we have right now. I have never felt ranking as a KPI. I've never reported on it. I've never believed in it. It's relatively arbitrary. And the moment you call me and say, damn it, I'm in fourth place, what the hell? And I look at it and find out you're in second place, I'm half as concerned as you are. And yet you're freaking out, and then you forget about it. And 3 days later, you go, oh, we're number one. You did something. And it's like, I did nothing other than ignore your email. Like, it's this type of fluctuation is the reality. And then when you get into local, you start seeing things like there's all kinds of changes happening in there. So we hear statements like, we do, a dozen updates a month, or we do 5 updates a day, or whatever. Yeah, I know. I live that. I worked at the engine. I know what this is. Most of them are inconsequential. They're housekeeping. They're small little things. They're never going to notice a difference on it. But aggregated, they either refine, or they offer an efficiency, or they offer a greater understanding of data for other systems in the engine. Today, we have real problems with mismatched expectations. Like, a lot of people in local are saying, I am this zip code, so everything in the zip code is me, except, that's awesome, but your bank is like 9 miles away from the customer in that zip code, and 2 miles into the next zip code is another one of your branches. So you're saying that the customer should be sent farther out of their way to your location because you want to capture everyone in that zip code to that location. Your desires for this have like zero meaning in the world of consumers' lives. So ultimately, it's really about proximity. It's really about, are you that close? What is the easiest thing? And just like the search engines are focused on reducing friction in search, all up in mobile searches and results, same thing's happening in local. Local spills over to the real world. And you can't talk about local without talking about mobile, because we already know all the data is that we're not sitting there looking it up on our computer and printing off a map and then going to our automobile. My concerns are things like 4 or 5 years from now, I'm having a conversation with my smart speaker that follows me into my automobile, that follows me into my office. What are the metrics that are helping me understand that path and what consumers are doing? And what happens if all of these smart glasses that are apparently coming out in 22 and 23, what if they actually gain traction? And now the set of results we're looking at is desktop is forgotten. We've got mobile, which is effectively an infinite scroll in some cases. So it's position 73 that matters most. Like, it's really, again, proximity against top of page at that point. And then you've got voice in here, and now you've got visual in here. Like, what are you doing to optimize for this? What does that look like? How are you positioning your company to answer these questions in these environments? And, should we be even talking about more video content at this point? I believe we should, but, like, people still think of it as, oh, well, I have a YouTube channel and I make YouTube videos and this is what I do. And it's like, oh, heck no. Like, you can reuse this all over the place. There's an unlimited number of places that you can be posting your video content, and you should be. Again, we're in an advanced world. There's no 101. So you don't get to cherry pick one thing and say, I'm going to go deep this year. I'm producing video content for YouTube. Awesome. Then your competition's going to walk away from you and your mobile listings. They're going to leave you behind and everything else. And that's it. And honestly, at a local level, I see that happen all the time. Like, it is still extraordinarily hard to find information about local businesses, and it simply should not be. It's much.
Duane, you touched perfectly on the last question that I have, because unfortunately I don't even know how, but 40 minutes has already flown by. My last question for each and every one of you before we open up to Q&A. So those who are tuned in, if you have your questions, start typing them into the chat box now, and we will get to the questions in just a moment. But when mobile happened, and I would love to hear all of your opinions on this, but when mobile happened, that was the new device. We basically had to refocus everything to this new device and optimizing for this new device. Going into 2020 and over the next few years, do you think that there's going to be another device or another big focus switch to where, as SEOs, we need to start optimizing for this new type of device or new digestion from the user perspective? Cindy, if you'd like to start us off, and then we'll go into Michelle and Duane.
Yeah, sure. So I think the smart speaker is where it's at, and especially the idea of the omnipresent smart speaker that goes with you regardless of which device you're on. So it's more of a smart speaker / just an account that is voice aware. And I think this is why the questions are so important, and mining things like people also ask, because like I did this in a talk recently, like you don't just yell a keyword out at you don't just yell umbrella and hope for a meaningful response. You would say a question, right? And so
now I kind of want to try that.
But it's not how people talk to their assistants. So it's this omnipresent account that follows you around, that knows what kind of connectivity you have, whether you have a big screen, a small screen, or no screen, knows whether you're driving or not, and can give you intent aware responses. That's the big thing now, I think.
Intent aware. Perfect. And Cindy, or I'm sorry, Michelle.
I know I'm hijacking Cindy's login here. We're both Cindy today. I honestly think that where we're heading, and we should start preparing now for it, it's many years away, but we're heading toward a deviceless future where the environment is search capable and voice aware. And the focus screens will be incredibly de-emphasized, with the exception of our work devices, right? So I think people should come to understanding day parting and daytime behavior versus evening behavior, and user intent around times, because I think that times are going to influence more than anything else where you are at what time, the device that you're going to be interacting with. But I really do think that on a consumer level, it's going to be your environment as searchable. And that's why the one true answer is incredibly important to be for that person in that time, in that location. The days of 10 blue links are long past, and ranking means nothing. Being the right answer means everything.
Yeah, and Michelle, I love the way you kind of frame this up. Like, it literally makes me think maybe we will get to a Star Trek type environment at some point. I, for one, would love to Fleet Academy, because
that has always been, that has always been Google's goal. They've never shied away from. We'd like to create the Star Trek computer.
Exactly, and as funny as it is, as ludicrous as it may seem to some people, we are actually substantially down that path. So for me, my answer to this question is more like, look, I'm not going to trump what Cindy's vision is. I believe wholeheartedly in what Michelle is saying. So rather than parrot all that, I'm going to suggest folks need to get their fundamentals in order now. Because if you don't do this, to Michelle's point, a single answer, the engine doesn't have loyalty. They don't care who provides the answer. They care about the veracity and accuracy of the answer. So if you are the best, you win. If you are not the best, you're left to the deeper real estate in the background. People can go do research and find you. There's a concept, I did not coin this phrase, and it's applied more to the hardware side of things, but there's a concept known as the splinter net. And I believe that's where we end up. We have a layer where all around us, there's one answer, it's the right answer, it's the best answer. It will change, it will fluctuate. But on a consumer level, you won't see the other 9 answers in the background. So yeah, 10 blue links, totally dead. It's an archaic thing. Like kids walk up to objects and talk to them today, expecting them to be enabled. We're going to have that same moment in time where people are going to come forward and just say umbrella, and they will get what they need in the context of that moment. You know, like they will get, here's an umbrella, here's a picture of an umbrella, this is what it's used for. By the way, it's raining where you're at right now. You know, because there's no physical embodiment, I can't hand you the umbrella, but that's what makes it funny. So I firmly believe though that if you don't have your fundamentals in place, and I'm talking like, yeah, let's drag structured data into the conversation at this point. If you don't have domain trustworthiness, if you aren't mobile friendly, if you aren't ready for these things, do you think the next vector after our mobile device, we already have voice right now, and it doesn't need our device, but it still relies on it through an app to share more information. But when you get a pair of smart glasses on, or a device that attaches to our current glasses that enables this type of thing, now suddenly your real estate is shrunk down. And the control and access to it is dramatically different, right? To Cindy's point, this ever-present kind of account of a smart assistant that we will have, this is something Bill Gates talked about years ago called digital agents. And they will be capable of doing a lot more on our behalf, up to and including policing the content that reaches us. So when I leave my home, all of those emails that everybody sends me hoping to sell me products, if I'm not interested in your camping gear right now, but I bought something 10 years ago, it doesn't matter whether I'm on your list or not. I will never know you reached out to me. And this is the world we are rapidly approaching. And it's fundamentals. If you want to connect with people, it has to be meaningful. Back to talking about content, about usefulness, about intent. And if you're not solving for those things now, or thinking about solving for those things now, 2 years is going to be too late. There'll be a whole new crop of businesses out there. You know, raise your hand if you're sleeping on a Casper or Purple or some other random bed that nobody heard of 6 years ago. And now it's the only thing we sleep on and we swear by it. Small player came out of nowhere, took market share, and now they define the space. So that, I think, is our future.
It's so true. User intent really is everything. Now we are opening up the floor to Q&A. We already have a few questions coming in that are very good. We'll start with George Jones. Feel free, anyone who would like to answer this. This is a two-part question. First part, do you feel that Google will continue to drive more and more traffic back to its own properties? With SERP real estate continuing to disappear, how should optimization strategies evolve? Anyone like to take the floor on this one?
So direct answer is yes. Revenue, like they're no different than anyone else in that regard. It's also about data acquisition. So the more they get, the more engagement they see, the better it is for their machine learning systems and all of their data sets. How you optimize for it, you need to get really good at being the answer, because that's how you capture and keep people. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, if people aren't paying attention to their site search, that's a massive missed opportunity. Because when somebody's on your website and they're using your site search, if they're getting a mediocre experience, they're going to bounce and go to a third party in the SERP, or Google will provide another answer. If your site search is nailing it and keeping them engaged and answering their questions, then you own that consumer engagement. So, you know, what's your optimization strategy? I'm going to suggest you need to think about 4 layers higher than your optimization strategy. You need to really think about, how do you engage customers? Why are you the one that they should stay with? And if you haven't answered that in real life or digitally, you got room for improvement.
And a question from Ryan Spiegel, and this one I'm very intrigued to hear an answer for. Are there any aforementioned dark corners you guys think is worth dabbling in for 2020? Maybe something a little off the beaten path, maybe something to experiment with. So we talked a lot about user intent, we talked a lot about content. So a lot of what we talked about was really hitting again with the fundamentals. Anything worth trying new in 2020?
I have 3 things.
Ooh,
Number 1,
yes.
the indexing API. Number 2, Google Posts in your GMB, and just what you can do with that and how much traction you can get there. And number 3, merchant center feeds, even if you're not doing PPC, Google's taking those feeds now and making product clusters and product carousels that are organic. All it wants is the feed and the markup of all the product data, and it's using that to a benefit. And I'll add in with that, that seems to be a way to get product knowledge graph, which is super powerful.
So I actually know Ryan, so I'm happy to buy him a burger and discuss this more in depth. But I love Cindy's ideas. I'm going to expand just slightly. If you have clients where it is even marginally appropriate, you need to be digging in on Amazon and figuring out what that landscape looks like for them. And I think it's incredibly important for people to pay attention to Amazon's overall footprint. So we touched a little bit earlier about this concept of your digital footprint and how important that can be in swaying consumers' opinion to engage and stay. Go to the footer of Amazon and take a look at all the properties they have. And what you're going to see there is you're going to see a whole lifestyle approach where Amazon is now connected to so many major factors in many people's lives that they have answers and solutions. So now you've got to be talking to yourself, not just about how do I optimize for Google? Sure. Bing, yeah. But how am I optimizing for, I don't know, this photography website? Should I have a presence on there? Should I be a member of the community? Should I be sponsoring this? Because that is germane to your product or service, and they have that facility. There's so many things like this, right? I know Cindy and Michelle were probably hoping that we would do this entire webinar without me mentioning TikTok, but here we are, right? It's new platforms. You have to pay attention to these things. I call out TikTok because it's the bright and shiny of the moment. But the fact remains, there'll always be another one to supplant it. There'll always be something else. If you are not focused on what's coming next, where consumers are engaging, what kind of demographic are in there, that's a missed opportunity. And I'm bullish on TikTok simply because the people that are mostly there, they're getting their first paychecks. So those are our next generation consumers. And if you're not attaching to them where they are, they're not coming looking for you. That we know. So, you got to pay attention to these new spaces. And these are kind of the dark corners that I think of is like, where are these niche groups that are highly engaged that are relevant to you, and how do you attach to them? In some ways, it's kind of getting back to our roots of marketing, and I think Michelle mentioned this, right? Like, if you don't understand the fundamentals of marketing, you are lost in these woods.
Yeah.
It is so
I would
important.
honestly say that a dark art for a lot of SEOs would be understanding brand marketing. I would.
Absolutely.
You have to go to where the people are. You have to identify who your audience is and then be wherever they are. It's not just on Google. They're not. They're also on Bing. Some of your audience is going to also be on Bing. Some of your audience is going to be on Reddit. Some of your audience is going to be on TikTok. They may not have money yet, but they'll get there. But the point is to build a brand, right? Because the brands are the things that survive. Companies come and go, brands thrive, brands survive if you do it right, and if you curate and if you really take care of your brand. But that takes time to develop. It's not something that's quick and easy. There are no shortcuts. I think SEOs are natural born shortcut seekers, right? There's a quicker way to the top, and I'm going to find it. Branding, there really isn't. It's a lot of work. It's an investment, but it's what will ensure that you're still here 5 years later, that you are a player. I think it's also important to consider decreasing an emphasis on Google, right? Google is a known quantity. We don't need to be overly focused on just Google. And it's worth considering when we talk about a screenless future, and when we talk about one solid answer, that's going to disrupt that business significantly because they are ad supported. So there is only one answer. Where does the ad fit, right? They need to diversify their income streams as much as we need to diversify our traffic streams. And I wouldn't count out a lot of other major players in artificial intelligence as being the ones that actually end up lapping Google because they don't have to monetize that servicing of information. They have other product streams. They make money in other ways. So those are the things I think people should just start thinking about.
It's, I'm gonna dogpile on this because Michelle makes, I think, a critical point here, right? This idea of shortcuts, like if you're thinking, well, Google is the majority of my traffic, Therefore, I focus on Google. Like, that's a shortcut. And that shortcut is going to cripple or kill a business over the next 5 years. I mean, to Michelle's point again, like, look at some of these major players. Microsoft isn't necessarily in the search game to make billions of dollars in ad revenue, and they don't. They're profitable, it's sustainable, but it is data. It teaches things to machines. That is massive, which means they have a more sustainable long run version of search. And then you start getting into, hey, you know what? You've got people on Bing that actually convert at a higher rate and are worth more money than the same people on Google on those phrases. So now you're starting to cut by demographic. So if I'm a business and I want to incrementally add, I don't know, let's just say my goal is to add another 50 to 100K in revenue a year to my bottom line. I might want to start focusing in these niche areas, you know, and private groups in Facebook, another great opportunity there. You approach the community, like, but it's about being a community member. And I don't care whether, you know, you're sponsoring or whatever, but really what we're talking about here is listening to the consumer and focusing on their intent at all levels. That's where we're at.
And that's echoed again and again throughout this entire conversation. And that, unfortunately, we are at the end. That wraps up the webinar. Cindy, Michelle, Duane, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of this valuable feedback. Those who have joined us, thank you. Please go and follow all these amazing, talented individuals on Twitter. And in the meantime, if you need or have any questions about Authority Labs, you can visit authoritylabs.com for more information. Thank you all so much and take care. Bye.
Thanks, guys.